Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. It's my great pleasure to be here to open this year's QBE Dive-In event, which is our contribution to the Global Dive-In Festival, championing diversity and inclusion in the insurance industry around the world. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sue Horton, the Chief Executive Officer of QBE Australia Pacific. And before we commence, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the many lands on which we are today. We're live streaming from our Sydney office, and so I acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, recognising their connection to the land, waters and culture. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past, present and future, and any First Nations people joining us today. I'd like to welcome our broker partners, customers, QBE employees and the Dive-In Festival community who've joined us from near and far as we tackle an important conversation today. At QBE, we pride ourselves on our inclusive culture, underpinned by our QBE DNA, which enables a workplace where we can feel valued, a sense of belonging, and respected for who we are. We're proud of our enduring relationship with Dive-In, with 2024 marking our 9th year of involvement. For those of you who are new, Dive-In Festival is an annual event specific to the insurance industry. It brings the sector together on a global scale and provides an opportunity to lean into and tackle important conversations around diversity and inclusion. It also provides an opportunity to check in on how we're tracking as an industry within our organisations and as individuals, to celebrate what we're doing well and reflect on where we can do better. Our event today places a spotlight on overcoming the odds and the importance of resilience, which leans into our organisational purpose to enable a more resilient future for our people, customers, and the communities in which we operate. Today, we're really privileged to be joined by Jelena Dokic, former world number 4 tennis player, who will share her incredible story, her passion for mental health, and the importance of organisations taking action to encourage a safe space to speak up. Jelena is a living testament to resilience, triumph, and the unyielding spirit of a true champion. Her journey on the court has been nothing short of awe-inspiring, marked by monumental victories and a fearless determination that defied all odds. At just 16 years old, Jelena dethroned the formidable Martina Hingis, the world number 1, at Wimbledon, etching her name in tennis history by orchestrating one of the sport's most astounding upsets. However, beyond the world of Grand Slams and courtside victories, there lies a narrative of courage and perseverance. A 2-time refugee, Jelena has navigated a path fraught with bullying and racism. Yet her most daunting battle unfolded within the confines of her own home, a harrowing ordeal of abuse endured at the hands of her father. A story that Jelena bravely shares through the pages of her 2 best-selling books, Unbreakable and Fearless. Through these traumatic experiences, Jelena found a resolve to not only survive, but to transcend and thrive. Emerging as a beacon of hope, she lends her influential voice towards the journey of reclaiming one's voice and strength. Beyond the world of tennis, Jelena's inspirational story makes her a sought-after speaker, a compelling TEDx presenter and commentator. And Jelena is also a presenter in Nine's coverage of the Australian Open and other Grand Slams. So we're really honoured to have her join us today to share her story of adversity, courage and resilience. She'll also be talking to the importance of diverse role models and demonstrating how organisations can take action to be more inclusive and empower their people to speak up. Following Jelena's presentation, we'll be hosting an audience Q&A. To ask a question, simply type your question into the Q&A box and click send, and we'll try to answer all your questions by the end of the session. Importantly, while this is a story of overcoming the odds, we recognise that some of the topics covered in today's event may bring up some challenging memories and emotions for some of you. We'd like to remind our employees that you can access our Employee Assistance Programme REACH for Wellbeing Council and other supportive services. This programme is also extended to our customers and broker partners, and the contact number for our provider, Assure, can be found on our website. If you're joining us from Australia, support can also be accessed through external pathways, including Beyond Blue, Lifeline and 1-800-RESPECT. If you're joining us from overseas, please do seek out local support groups in your regions to have a conversation. It's important we all look after ourselves and each other. And on that note, it's my great pleasure to welcome Jelena Dokic.
Thank you so much, Sue. Thank you so much, to everyone that's tuning in, and also thank you for having me and the opportunity to bring my story and something that's really close to my heart that I talk about, and that I want that to be my legacy as well. So thank you for believing in me and supporting me to bring you this presentation. I'm really excited, and I hope that it does spark some really positive conversations, because they are a way to change. So thank you so much. I'm honoured. Don't you dare say anything. Don't you dare say anything to anyone, or I will kill you. Those were the words repeated to me pretty much daily by my father. I was taught, trained, and raised to stay silent. In silence, darkness thrives. The power of child abuse, domestic violence, bullying, racism, mental health struggles is our silence. I'm a former world number 4 tennis player, a Grand Slam singles semi-finalist, a Grand Slam doubles finalist, now a commentator, 2-time best-selling author, and a speaker. But by far, my biggest accomplishment was finding my voice and reclaiming my life through sharing my story. Why? Because it literally saved my life. I would not be here today if I did not tell my story. Today, I try and use my voice to call out injustice, to advocate for change, to help normalise the conversation around really important issues, and most importantly, to help remove the shame and stigma that's associated with talking about these really important issues like domestic violence and mental health. This is a story of going from victim to survivor, and most importantly, to thriver. But first, let me start at the beginning. My name is Jelena Dokic. I was born in war-torn Yugoslavia, the part and country that is now Croatia. We didn't have very much growing up, but I do remember having some really good memories as a child with both my mother and my father. In 1989, my father watched the French Open semi-final between two legends of the game, Monica Seles and Steffi Graf, who also became my heroes and role models. And the next day, he just showed up at home with this big tennis racket. And the rest is history. That was the beginning of my tennis journey. The very next day, I had my very first tennis lesson. I remember it like it was yesterday. I remember hitting that very first ball. I loved tennis straight away. I loved hitting balls and aiming for targets. And I loved the fact that it was a really competitive and individual sport. I was very competitive as a kid. But with the joy of playing tennis straight away, something else came for the very first time. And that was abuse. My father, after my very first tennis lesson, he pulled my hair, pulled my ears, slapped me around, just knocked me around. It was a complete shock. I was in tears, especially because he'd never laid a hand on me before this. Something changed in that moment, and in fact, things were never the same again. I continued playing. I had a really natural talent for the game. I was getting better and better. I started playing tournaments and started winning matches and tournaments, but my father only got worse, and things only got worse and escalated because he also became an alcoholic. By the time I was 11, I was kicked, I was spat at, I was hit with a leather belt constantly to the point of bleeding. By the time I was 16, I had one of my worst beatings ever, where my father kicked me and punched me in the head so hard that he left me unconscious. There was also the emotional, psychological, and financial abuse. By the time I was 10 or 11, I was already called the most insulting of names. And at the age of 17, a really tough emotional moment for me that left a lot of trauma and a scar was when I did reach the Wimbledon semi-finals. My father thought that was such a disgrace and an embarrassment to be a Wimbledon semi-finalist that he did not allow me to come back home to the hotel. I had to stay on the grounds of Wimbledon and hide and try and find somewhere to sleep for the night. Outside of home and tennis, there was also some other hardship and adversity. We were refugees twice. First time when I was 8 years old, we had to move out of Croatia into neighbouring Serbia when the war erupted in former Yugoslavia. We were left overnight with 2 plastic bags. We thought that we would be back, that there actually wouldn't be a full-out war, but we never went back again. We arrived in Serbia. We lived in really tough conditions in a rat-infested shed, no heating, limited water. We were lucky if we had bread to eat, but most days we went hungry. Standing in line at the Red Cross at 4 a.m. Every single week was a normal occurrence just to get some basics. My brother was 3 months old. I was 8 years old. I also saw my very first dead body when I was 8. 3 years later, we were refugees again, and this time we landed in Australia, in Sydney. Now, I loved Australia straight away. It felt like home as soon as I arrived. But it did come with its challenges. It was a cultural shock. I also did not speak a word of English, and I was bullied at school and in the tennis community. And I was constantly told to go back where I came from. Despite all of this, I had a massive talent for the game and passion for tennis, but also for life. It took me to world number one, junior world number one at 15, a Grand Slam singles semi-finalist at 17, a Grand Slam doubles finalist at 18, and world number 4 at 19. But for my father, it wasn't enough. In fact, he was only getting worse. He was unraveling. Some of his outbursts were now public. It was affecting my reputation. But worst of all, the abuse behind closed doors was getting worse. I had no choice. So at the age of 19, I escaped in the middle of the night during a tennis tournament and ran for my life. It didn't stop there, though. My father still continued to make my life very difficult. He would show up at tournaments. I had to hire around-the-clock security for 3 years on tour, which no one knew about. He would constantly threaten me as well. And all of that pressure, trauma, abuse, and the blame that was put onto my shoulders really took a toll on me. At the age of 22, in 2005, I almost committed suicide. I survived this moment, but my mental health was still affected. I had no idea that at the time I was already battling anxiety, depression, PTSD, and even an eating disorder. I continued playing tennis on and off for a few more years. I had still some great results, like my 2009 Australian Open run. But due to injuries and my mental health struggles, I had to retire early at the age of 29. It was really hard. The retirement and retiring early was really hard for me, but I had nothing left. I was just drained and really, really struggling. So here I was with no identity left. I always felt like tennis was my identity. And most importantly, though, with massive trauma that I really struggled with, and this was now not even about what I was going to do next. This was whether I was actually going to survive this. And the goal was now just to be able to one day live a normal life. I struggled very early on in my retirement, and then something amazing happened 2 years into me retiring. An opportunity landed on my manager's desk to write a book. And I remember I always used to joke about writing a book and say, maybe one day, maybe when I'm 50 and have more stories to tell. But here it was, the opportunity was here. And my first instinct straight away was yes. But there was a few really important questions that I had to answer to myself, but also a few fears that I had to get over, and especially where I was at that moment in my life, just having turned 30. For me, I had to have a real purpose on why I was going to do this. And for me, straight away, I didn't want to write a book just for the sake of writing it. I actually wanted to do something with my story. So for me, it was about helping someone. All I wanted was to help one person in some way by telling my story. I even say at the end of my first book, Unbreakable, that if it helps that one person out there, for me, it's mission accomplished. I also, though, had the fear of what would happen if I detail all of my mental health struggles publicly. Also, if I detailed all the abuse that I went through and everything that I went through behind closed doors, talked about an eating disorder, talked about my depression and anxiety. And I had that fear, but I went into it with courage. And I believed in vulnerability. I believed in sharing my story, speaking up and using my voice. Even more so because I felt like I always had role models when it came to tennis, but not so much when it came to a lot of other things outside of tennis. I felt like that is something that I needed, maybe something that I could resonate with and their story. So I went into writing my book 18 months later. My first book, Unbreakable, came out in November 2017. And I have said it every single day since my book has come out, and that is that it was the best day of my life. Now, I don't say that lightly because while I've had lows, I've had amazing highs in my life and my career, but this was special. This was something else. And you might ask why. And it's actually quite simple because for the first time in 30 years and almost my whole life, I was actually free. I started living my life for the very first time. I wasn't silenced anymore. I found my voice. I reclaimed my life and my power. And for the very first time now, I was really feeling like I was my true self. And that's the power of vulnerability. And that's the power of speaking up and sharing our stories. It really does free you from whatever it is that you're going through. But from there, that's really where the work starts. It was not like I was healed. It was just the beginning of my healing journey. So I still had to do a lot of work and a lot of soul searching. But also this is where the next chapter of my life begins and why I do what I do today. I really saw the importance of advocating, using our voices, using our stories and listening to victims and survivors' stories to create change. I saw the power of words, whether written or whether spoken, and really the power of knowledge. But we cannot find that power unless we speak up and we have a safe space and environment. So I've made it my mission and my legacy to now make a difference. And this was not just about me anymore. This was actually now about helping others. As soon as my first book came out, I got incredible support, whether you were a tennis fan or not, whether it was media, whether it was journalists. It was amazing to see that. And literally everyone was on board and so supportive. But at the same time, people would come up to me and everyone would say thank you. And so many more people came up to me than even at the height of my career, which was quite surprising. And people would say thank you, but I had no idea what for. And I would say, no problem, you're welcome. But I didn't know what I was really thanking them for. And then after a couple of months, I started asking people. And they would say to me, well, thank you for speaking up and thank you for sharing your story. It's really helped me because it resonates with me. I've gone through something similar, or I know someone that's gone through something similar. Then I also started hearing things like, thank you for being so open and honest, because there is so much shame and stigma in not just sport and tennis, but in society when we talk about personal things, or when we talk about mental health, or when we talk about domestic violence, you are straight away shamed and stigmatized. There's victim blaming. You are straight away looked at differently. And in that moment, I realized that there was not just shame and stigma in tennis, but in sport and society. And that's where my real work begins. 6 years later, my new book, my second book, has come out, Fearless. And it is a completely different journey. It is about healing and the resilience and the persistence that it takes to do that. It is about not being defined and defeated by your past. It is about turning the negative and the bad into something positive and something good that can not just help yourself, but others as well. It is about thriving. So how do you go from not just victim to survive, but to actually find that power to thrive? But most importantly, it is about the power of sharing our stories. It is about the power of vulnerability. It is about the power of speaking up, but then us creating that safe space and environment for people to do so. It doesn't matter whether you are a public figure or not. It is about the power of gratitude, about the power of kindness. And a few things have helped me find that power to thrive, which I think we can all kind of use, not just in the work environment, but in society, in sport, but also when it comes to our lives as well, which I'll go through now. So for me, there's been a few things, and I'll start with self-worth, because self-worth was massive. I'm not sure if I ever really had any self-worth, and that's a consequence of domestic violence, but also mental health struggles. That's what abusers and perpetrators unfortunately do, especially when you go through abuse very early on in your childhood. But it's also a consequence of mental health struggles. You don't feel like you're worthy. You are lost. You don't feel like you have any self-esteem and any self-confidence. And I really felt that. I needed to get my self-worth back. So for me, I always looked for that external validation. And for me, it was always so massive what other people would think. I really relied on that. I really took it personally, and it was not the right way to go about it. So I started to think about my self-worth and how to actually start getting that back, because I needed to believe in myself, my capabilities. And then I realized that my self-worth is actually all mine. It's what I think of myself and what I believe that I can do. It doesn't depend on anybody else. Our self-worth is ours. It's not a group decision. It's not about what others think. I had a coach once who was not a great example, and he said to me a few years before I retired, "You better play tennis for as long as you can." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, what else are you going to do? You're useless." And I remember my father used to tell me that all the time. That is what abusers and perpetrators do. They put you down so that they can have that control. They kill your self-worth within you. And it really affected me. I would be lying if I said that it didn't. And it did for a few years after that as well. But the difference to today is that if someone said something like that, I would not care at all. I wouldn't have a care in the world, because it doesn't matter what someone else says. My self-worth and my self-confidence is based on what I think I'm capable of. It's mine. It does not belong to anyone else. And I think that that's really important. Don't allow anybody to dictate what your self-worth is and what you're capable of. Straight into that goes self-belief. And self-belief is massive. For this example of self-belief, I always connect tennis and sport with life. I think they're really closely connected together in this example. As an athlete, especially as a tennis player, because tennis is such a competitive and individual sport, you really have to believe in yourself. You got to rely on yourself, especially when you're out there playing. There's no one that can do anything or help you. You rely on yourself. So you really got to believe in yourself. If you don't believe in yourself, doesn't matter if it's a practice, if it's practicing a certain shot, but even more so when you're going out there to compete and play a match and tournaments, you got to believe that you can win. It's as simple as that. Now, you might say to me, what if you play the world number one? What if you play Serena Williams or the greatest of all time? Absolutely. You still have to believe that you are good enough and that you can win. Look, you might get smashed 6-love, but that doesn't mean that you don't believe. Because if you don't believe, you have no chance. You've already lost before you've even set foot on the tennis court. If you actually get into a position to win, even if you have a match point, you will not be able to get over the line if you don't truly believe in yourself, if you don't truly believe that you can win. And it's the same in life. You have no chance of getting through anything if you don't believe it. If you believe in things, that's at least the start of getting through something and continuing to push even when it gets hard. Resilience is massive, and I connect resilience with self-belief because the most resilient people in the world have three things. They believe that they can somehow change the outcome. Number two, they really believe in themselves, that they can get through anything, no matter what, and really keep their strength and their character in face of adversity. And number three is that they believe that no matter the setbacks, the losses, the failures or falls, they will not just be able to get back up, but it will make them stronger. They can get better from it. So that's why self-belief is so massive. Now, the next two things for me are the most important, especially when we're having conversations, events, and presentations like this. That is shattering the myth of perfection and the power of vulnerability. I've experienced this on my own skin. I've seen people experience it in a positive way as well. I've seen it make a massive difference, and it's been life-changing in all different sports and fields, especially with personal stories. Shattering the myth of perfection is so important because perfection actually doesn't exist. It's unattainable. Who decides what perfect is, right? No one. But by the way, what is perfect? What's a perfect body size? What's a perfect height? What's a perfect job? What's a perfect athlete, right? An easy example is you've got Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal, Novak Djokovic. Oh, all amazing, pretty perfect, but also different, right? So it's really important to shatter that myth of perfection, because it's an unattainable standard that we put out there in society and in the world and on social media, but it's also really an impossible expectation to put on ourselves. I used to remember, because I grew up in an environment with my father where nothing was ever good enough. And I used to really be affected by this feeling of always having everything to be perfect and hitting these amazing shots and having these wins and having these good moments, but they were not good enough. And I've seen it in sport as well. Being our best selves and, yes, striving to be better and striving to continuously try and improve in something, yes, but not for perfection. Perfection does not exist, which leads me into the next thing, which is the power of vulnerability. The best way to live your best life, to be the best version of yourself, is to be your most open, honest, authentic self. And that requires you to be vulnerable. That's how you live your best life, because you free yourself of everything. You're not living in fear. You're not living in pain. You are actually being yourself, your most honest, authentic self. In sport and in society, silence was golden. It still is. If you talked about anything that resembled an eating disorder, mental health, domestic violence, you straight away felt like you were going to be shamed and stigmatized. You also felt like you were weak. You felt like you were giving this edge away to your opponent. But even more so, you were worried about sponsors, media, fans. Were you worthy enough anymore, or were you weak? And it was really affecting a lot of people, not just people with a public profile, not just athletes, but everyone. And here is the thing, that's connected to shattering the myth of perfection as well. Vulnerability is actually a massive, massive strength. It takes courage to be vulnerable. It takes guts to be vulnerable. It's not easy. I even look back now 7 years to writing my first book, and I'm sometimes surprised with, to be honest with you, with how much courage I had to come out and write my book, when not a lot of people, no one in tennis really ever spoke up about something like that. And I had a lot of fear. So it took courage to actually do that. And people show us every day how much courage it takes to be vulnerable. And that is the narrative we need to change. It needs to change. Vulnerability is not a weakness. Vulnerability is not something that we shame and stigmatize people about. Vulnerability has allowed me to say, this is my life, this is me. I actually want to try and get professional help. And I needed for me to get professional help and to see how it would be and what would happen. I didn't know what would happen, but I actually finally felt free to go, you know what, I don't care what people think, but I'm going to go and get professional help. And I did. It saved my life. And it's okay, it's not for everyone, and I understand that. But vulnerability has allowed me to explore that avenue, and it actually saved my life. I learned so much about myself as well. I'm continuing to get professional help to grow as a person. Vulnerability has allowed me also to call out social media trolling and abuse and body shaming as well. It's been a really important, I don't like to say fight and battle, even though it kind of has been a little bit, but it's been something really important to talk about the last 2 or 3 years. I went into it with kindness, just wanting people to see the kind of, let's say, messages that we get on social media, but also how we sometimes, as public figures, what we deal with, especially when you're in a public eye and under the microscope. And body shaming is one of it, especially for women. Now, that's the power of vulnerability. If I originally didn't tell my story and write my first book, I never would have taken that on 2 or 3 years ago. And it was amazing. It's an incredible thing that I've done because it's made a difference. People have stood up and listened. The media, the journalists, they've written amazing stories and articles about it. And I'm so thankful for that. But that never would have happened if I wasn't open about it, if I wasn't vulnerable, and if I went out there and if I talked about it so openly, and my experience with body shaming and with trolling as well. And that's the power of vulnerability. There have been amazing people, and there have been especially amazing women that have changed the world with their stories, but also with their incredible courage to be vulnerable when it wasn't necessarily normal to be, and when there was a lot of shame and stigma. Grace Tame, who is a huge inspiration of mine, the way that she told her harrowing story with so much honesty. She was so raw, she was so open, and she was so vulnerable. It changed things for so many. It even changed the law. Simone Biles and the US gymnastics team, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, and what that uncovered in the gymnastics world, and the incredible amount of abuse that it uncovered, not just by parents, but by coaches and support staff. It changed things in all sports and the measures that we have in place. The Me Too movement actually came out just a few months after my first book. It was amazing to see that unfold, because it took one woman to bravely share her experience and story, and everything crumbled, and it uncovered decades and decades of just harrowing abuse and what women went through. These stories changed the world, but their power and the power of vulnerability changed the world. So that's why we need to create safe spaces and environments for people to feel safe, like they can be vulnerable, like they can speak up, like they can share their stories. Our biggest lessons are the stories and experiences of victims and survivors. They start conversations, and that's how change happens. How many times have we heard about the deaths, and we mourn the deaths? But how many times have we heard, well, I didn't know, we had no idea, we didn't see anything. And it's all too familiar. You don't see anything, because so many people put on a brave face and they suffer in silence. They suffer in silence because they are afraid they're going to be shamed and stigmatized. Domestic violence victims and survivors were victim blamed. If you talked about your mental health, and especially that maybe you wanted to get professional help, let's be honest, you were called crazy. And we used terms like the loony bin so often. So people felt like they couldn't be open and honest about it. So many people have been told that they are looking for attention, or that they are playing victim, or that they want pity and they want people to feel sorry for them. But couldn't be more wrong. It's actually that we just want some help because we are in so much pain and we are in suffering. So here you had people suffering in silence, and here you have the deaths. There was no middle. The middle is creating awareness. The middle is creating change by having open conversations. That's how real change happens. So that's a real lesson, I think, in all fields. And whether it's in schools, sports, workplaces, different fields. It's about having the culture of safety, of having a safe environment, and feeling like you can talk about anything, and like you can get help, like you will feel like you are accepted, like you are heard, and like you belong. 9 Australians will take their life every single day. That's just in Australia alone. More than 1 million people take their life every single year worldwide, and that's only what we know is reported. So we really need more unashamed conversation around all of these issues. I will just quickly touch on 2 more things. I think they're important kind of for us a little bit personally, in our personal lives, also in our workspaces, and the way that I think we are as people, but also the culture that we create. This next thing is really important because I've felt both sides of the medal. I have experienced when you don't have anyone, and it almost cost me my life. And I've had a couple of people at different times in my life that have believed in me. And we are often taught that you have to have a family, that you have to have a lot of friends, a lot of people from your work environment and co-workers. But the reality is, for a lot of us, that's not going to happen. A lot of people grow up without parents, without supportive families, leave home early. A lot of people don't have a lot of friends for different reasons. And for example, for me, I traveled the world. I grew up in a very competitive environment. I changed schools and countries 4 or 5 times. So I did not have a lot of friends growing up. So it really creates a difficult environment. But here's the thing. All you need is one person, and you can move mountains. Just one person. And here is why. I met this next person a little bit later in life, just a couple of years before I retired. And that's Todd Woodbridge. I'm not sure if you know who he is. I'm sure a lot of you do. Amazing tennis player, champion tennis player, amazing commentator, host, everything he does, incredible. But most importantly, a legend of a person. Now, I met him 2-3 years before I retired. We've now been friends for 15 years. He's been my mentor. But at the time when I retired, I didn't know him as well. Anyway, he called me up the day I retired and he said, let's meet tomorrow. I said, okay. And we met, we sat down, and he said, the first thing he said was, what are we going to do? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, what are we going to do now? What's next? We start planning now. We do it now. And I had no idea. Here I was, just retired early, still only 29. I was a person with nothing to aspire to, no goals, no dreams. I was struggling to even live at this point. And he was this person that was not related to me. He was not my family. I really kind of barely knew him. And he believed in me so much. And it wasn't just that he believed in me. It was that he said, what are we going to do? Not what are you going to do? What are we going to do? And that changed everything. He believed in me professionally. Then after it turned into him really believing in me personally, in the person that I can become. But he said all these things. You can do TV and commentary. He knew I was a little bit interested in commentary. He said, you can do so much with your story. You can be a speaker. And if you saw me at that moment 11 years ago, you would understand why I was so shocked, because I was a person that couldn't string 2 sentences together, couldn't look people in the eye. I had no social skills left. I was locked in my room, not my house, my room, my 4 walls. I was afraid to go out of the house. I didn't even have the skills anymore to face people. And he was believing in me and saying all these things. And I'm thinking, who are you talking about? And that was his belief in me. He believed in me. And now I say, of course, he was right about everything. I always tell him. But I always say now to everyone, be someone's Todd. I hope someday someone will say, be someone's Yelena, maybe. But until then, I will say, be someone's Todd. His belief in me professionally and then personally in who I can be as a person changed everything for me. He believed in me. He was there for me. So that's why I always say to everyone, I think it's a great example. I always like to turn it around and go, you can be someone's Todd, just for that one person. I can't change the world alone. Todd can't change the world alone, but we can change someone's world. You can change someone's world. That's how change happens. The most important thing is to feel like you belong, like you are accepted, like you are believed, like you are loved. And that is a big part of our mental health as well. And if you don't have your mental health, it's really hard to be happy, find joy, and you don't, from there, have a lot. No matter how you define success personally or professionally, you need to feel that acceptance. You need to feel that belonging. So whether you're a friend, a sister, a brother, a co-worker, mother, father, doesn't matter, make sure that someone feels like they belong, like you are kind to them, like you love them. And that leads me just quickly to the last thing before I end, is it was really important for me to live in alignment with some of my core values. And some of those are gratitude, kindness, but it was also really important for me to not live with any hate, resentment, or bitterness. Firstly, because I watched that from my father for decades. That's how he was. But secondly, for me to be able to heal, to be able to change my life, to be able to thrive, and to be able to help others, I really needed to do everything with grace and with dignity, yes, with strength, but with no hate, no bitterness and resentment. I went into writing my books with no hate, resentment, or bitterness towards anyone, even my father. And some people are surprised by that. But I really wanted to make sure it was like that. I did not want to blame anyone. This was never about blaming anyone. This was about putting my story out there. This was about making a difference and maybe helping someone. And that is really important. That's how I want to live my life. A lot of people ask me, who knew? Did people know? Surely someone knew. And I don't even answer that question because I go, you know what? It doesn't matter. As long as we are where we are today and things would be different and change has been created and I can help someone, that's all that matters. And I think that that's also really helped me to heal as a person, to not have any of that bitterness and resentment. Gratitude has been massive. I've always been quite, I think, a grateful and humble person. I was lived by that from a very young age because I come from a very humble beginning and I wanted to always be and stay that way. But I will just quickly give this example of my late mother-in-law. She died from cancer 4 years ago, and it was a massive loss for me. And she took me in when I was 20, but not just into her home. She took me into her heart. She didn't have to do that. She was a woman that went through so much, lost 2 brothers, went through a war, lost everything that she had in her life and built, and you would never know it. She lived with so much kindness and gratitude, but most importantly, she cared about others so much. And that's where kindness comes into place, but also gratitude as well, because she was so grateful. And she was so grateful for the smallest of things. She always used to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I never knew why. And then I realized it was to have 2 coffees and write in her journal up until about 7 o'clock in the morning when everyone else would get up. And I never understood it. I watched it for years. And I swear I started drinking coffee because of her. I hated coffee just to see what it was about. And now I get it. That was her moment. That is all she needed. She just needed her coffee in some peace in the morning to write a little bit in a journal, have that time to herself for a few hours, and that was good. She was good to go. That's all she needed. Anything else that happened good that day for her was a bonus. And now I do the same thing. Even if I have a flight at 6 a.m. in the morning, I get up at 3 a.m. just to have that half an hour, 45 minutes at least for my coffee. That is my moment. That's all I need. That's how I start my day. It's a non-negotiable. But she taught me that kindness, that gratitude. I think that that's really important in the way that we live our life. So I will end on this. This is how I find or have found a way to thrive. And this is how I thrive today. I don't let the past define me or defeat me. I try to turn the negative and bad into positive and good. I try and turn pain into power. I didn't want to just merely survive. I wanted to thrive. I wanted to do it with passion and empathy and compassion and strength and character. I make sure that I can help others. I try and live my life with kindness. I have thought about not telling the beginning of my story. I have thought about doing my keynote presentations and everything I do without mentioning it so much, with maybe just skimming over it. But then I realized that I would be doing a disservice, not just to myself and my younger self, but to all the victims and survivors of mental health, domestic violence, child abuse, bullying, and racism. These stories need to be told. The best leaders in the world have an incredible power to tell the hard stories with empathy and compassion, and then go into trying to actually make a difference and create a change. I, to be honest with you, thought about not telling my story and have it be a part of my presentations, because I also kind of felt like I don't want people to shame and stigmatize me, even though I'm a very vulnerable person and I don't care about that shame and stigma. I really believe in myself and my story and having my voice and sharing it to try and create change. But I didn't want people to think that I want attention. I didn't want people to feel sorry for me and to have pity. I even say at the end of my first book, I don't want pity and I don't want people to feel sorry for me. I'm not a victim. But then I realized, you know what? People died due to that exact judgment. So I'm going to share my story. It's important to speak up and not hide from it. But here's the thing. I only wanted to be 20% of me and who I am and my story. I want the other 80% to be about hope. I want it to be about the light at the end of the tunnel. I want it to be about resilience. I want it to be about not giving up. I want people to believe in that hope. I want people to believe in standing up in who they are and that they didn't give up on themselves. So I will just end on these final few sentences. I was always a survivor, but I wanted to go past that. I always believed in my goals and my dreams, and I didn't give up on them, and I didn't give up on myself. So the best advice I can give to someone is don't give up on those goals and your dreams, but most importantly, don't give up on yourself. Let's please create an environment that is kind, that is safe, that is inclusive, that gives people the hope, the ability and the belief that they can be vulnerable, that they can share their stories, and they can be their most authentic selves. Words, whether written, whether spoken, have so much power. Knowledge is power, but there is none of that if we don't speak up, if you are not open and honest, and if we don't have these kinds of conversations and these kinds of events. So please don't give up on yourselves. Don't give up on your goals and your dreams, and always believe that there's a way. My 13-year-old self, I always say, I hope that she would be proud of me. And I hope that she's even more proud of me, maybe in 10, 15, and 20 years' time. That is what I want my legacy to be. I want my legacy to be that I fought, that I stood up, that I didn't give up, that I found a way for myself, but then that I also really tried to help others, to try and create some kind of change, even for just one person, that I was someone's Todd, that I believed in someone, that I didn't give up on them, that I made them feel accepted and like they belong and like they are loved. And I hope that you can do the same. Victim, survivor, thriver. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Yelena. That was so inspiring. Thank you for sharing your story, for having the courage to share it with us, but also the courage to put it into books as well. We've got a few questions coming through, and I want to give that as much time as possible. But
Sure.
just one question to start with. You talk a lot about vulnerability and the importance of it shattering the myth of perfect. Before you wrote your book, what was the turning point where you sort of realized this, and that writing the book and sharing that story would be helpful? What prompted that within you?
Oh, I think I was keeping it in so much, and I was always putting on a brave face. And I also, at the same time, kind of felt like I was alone. And I felt like I had role models in kind of tennis, but then I was like, oh, I don't really have anyone I can kind of resonate with or maybe identify with outside of being an athlete in going through domestic violence or maybe going through a mental health struggle. So that was a little bit of that kind of drive for me. And again, like I said, me writing my book and being so open, people that have read my first book and even my second, even though that's a bit of a lighter read, will know just how open and honest I was in describing domestic violence and mental health and what that looked like. And it's a very raw and open account of it. And again, it's not like I didn't have fear. During the whole process of a year and a half of writing, I went back and forth and had some doubts whether I should be and whether I should be so vulnerable. So there definitely was that. But again, not even so much coming from me. It was more about what society would think. It was about social media. It was about, so it wasn't even that I was ashamed of myself. I wasn't. I was very actually proud of myself for getting through that. But it was, again, more about society. So I kind of said to myself, you know what? Let's just do it. Let's get this courage, and whatever happens, happens. I believed in myself and my story, and kind of where, we should celebrate people and women but people in general that go through tough times. I don't know why we are afraid of people that go through things and survive it, why we are not talking about that more. So I found a lot of power in that. And that kind of turned my thinking around. But still, like I said, look, I even a day before my book came out, 24 hours before, I was still, let's see how this will go, what will happen, even though I had no shame and stigma when it comes to me feeling myself that way. But yeah, I think it was one of those things where you just kind of go through fear with courage and bravery. And that's where I found that vulnerability. That's why I call vulnerability that it is a strength and it is courage. And that's what it literally takes. And it's not a weakness.
Yeah, I really admire that courage. I really do. I'm going to link a couple of questions, Elena, because I want to try and get through as many as possible. I think they're a bit linked. So the first one is, do you see this kind of pressure on children to succeed in things like tennis and other sports? Is there anything that can be done by Tennis Australia and other sporting bodies to identify and intervene? And a similar question, thank you for sharing your story. Mental health issues are more and more prevalent in sport, and sometimes we hear when it's too late. And do you think enough is being done by sports governing bodies, particularly tennis?
Look, so I'll answer the first one. Sports, especially individual sports like tennis, will always be very competitive. There are individual sports, and there's also a lot of there's a lot at stake. There's a lot of money at stake as well. And whenever you've got sport that has a lot of money and prize money involved in it, I always say, firstly, it creates monsters out of parents. I've always said that, but also it comes with a lot of pressure and expectation on athletes that are very young. But look, you have it in other sports as well. And I kind of always say, look, that's it comes with the territory. I don't think pressure is a bad thing. The problem that you have is how parents and families and teams around athletes deal with pressure and how they help athletes, right? So Billie Jean King, I'll use her famous quote, pressure is a privilege. And I actually really agree with that. Because to be even in a position to have pressure, it means you're doing something right. You've gotten to that point where there's pressure for you to do even more, to be even better. I think we're always going to have pressure in our life. We're going to have pressure no matter, I think, what field you're in. There's always some kind of pressure. I don't think pressure is a bad thing. I think you have to embrace it. You have to get outside of your comfort zone. You have to push yourself. That's how you also really discover who you are as a person as well. So I don't think pressure is a bad thing. It's more, especially for kids and especially in sport, how people around them help them deal with it. And that it's not all money and result based, that you look after their health, that you look after their mental health, that you help them deal with it. And then the problem that you have is that pressure turns into abuse. And it's actually not a gray area for me. It's black and white. Pressure is one thing, but abuse is completely the other. But with pressure comes abuse, unfortunately, in a lot of these sports, especially for girls more. So girls are more vulnerable and start even earlier, even in tennis, start on the tour a little bit earlier than boys do. So I don't think pressure is a problem. It's more how we view pressure, how parents view it, how coaches view it, how managers view it, and what they do to prevent that, and what they do to help athletes focus on what they need to focus on, and that they also push the message that failure and falling and losing is not a bad thing. It's a lesson, as long as you get back up again. So I think it's more how I think we educate athletes and kids from a very young age. When it comes to the second question with mental health, that is something that has definitely improved in sport and in tennis. I know Tennis Australia has a great program. They now have psychologists and psychiatrists available for athletes and even for younger kids. A few governing bodies do. The problem with sports like tennis is that it's such a it's a sport that's played all around the world, and the issue that you have is that every country has their federation and different governing bodies, so it's basically up to them what they want to do and what they don't. That's the problem. It's not all under one umbrella. But I know that quite a few countries are doing more. Australia is, I can say, even, one of those leaders up there in protecting kids, in safeguarding, in things that they have available. And I know that they now have psychologists and psychiatrists at Grand Slams and all the big tournaments as well on the professional tour, which is something that was unheard of when I played. So that's definitely, from that perspective, definitely much better. And I know that it definitely would have helped me at the time if I had that, because I remember going to look for psychiatrists and psychologists. And yeah, it was such a, there was so much, again, stigma around that, especially as an athlete.
Yeah. Thanks. It's really good to hear how you distinguish between those, and also that things are improving in some ways, even if there's a long way to go. We've got another question here, slightly different. When you feel those dark moments or clouds approaching, what are your go-to strategies to push past that?
Yeah, I think I always tell myself that I am a big believer in a positive mindset, but at the same time, I think sometimes we can get lost in toxic positivity, which I think is important, because toxic positivity is something different, where you go, it'll be fine, it'll be better. You have got, what are you worried about, and so on. But then I think a positive mindset of going, okay, you can have those bad days. Let's try and get the most of it. If, all I did, I tell myself, if all I did today was get up, brush my teeth and put my clothes on, I'll take it, because I've survived, I've gotten through the day, and we'll live to fight another day tomorrow. So I think it's that kind of shattering the myth of perfection, that we have to get up and go and work 12 hours a day every single day, and every single day we have to win and accomplish. And that's not always going to happen, but also that's not always winning. For me, if I'm not feeling great today, for me to get up today and to still, be able to get out of bed, to still be able to maybe go for a 10-minute walk, or even just get to work, even if you kind of go a little bit through the motions but manage to get through the day, that's winning. I mean, that's winning. So I think that I try to tell myself that. I try to still go a little bit more into, okay, what is maybe getting me down? What is going on in today or currently in my life? How can I tick, some of those boxes? Maybe you have 4 or 5 boxes of what's important to you in your life, or what's making you feel up or down. Let's tick the boxes that we have, and then we have a look at what we don't. I also have little things where I definitely write every single, if not every single day almost, but every single week, 3 to 5 things that I'm grateful for. And there's actually a little post-it note there, right there on my fridge, there's a gratitude comment. So for me, I'll look at that. Those are some of the things that get me back into a positive mindset, but kind of in a realistic way, not just saying, it'll be fine. So I try to go to some of those things, and then I think about things that actually do make me feel good. It could be a phone call to a friend. It could be going for a 10-minute walk. It could be spending some time in nature. It could be, taking that much needed 1-hour break with no phone. So there's little things that actually don't make me feel as overwhelmed, and actually they make me feel calmer. I think that's very important. And also I think you need to, this is actually what I learned from my psychiatrist, which I didn't actually think about, is also usually our mind naturally goes to much darker places and negative places a little bit automatically. And we need to bring ourselves back, because what the reality of the situation is usually not as bad as what our mind turns it out to be. We usually go a lot further ahead. So I try to think about the situation and go, okay, what's the silver lining? What is still the positive I can get out of it? It's not the best case scenario, but what can I do to still get the best out of it? And also I try to think about, what can I control? Because what I can't control, I can't control. Usually we want to control things that are not in our power. So I always go, look, I'll do what I can, what's in my power, what I can control. The rest is kind of up to the universe. And I think some of these things really make me feel calmer. I feel less overwhelmed. They get me into a bit of a more positive mindset. And those are some of the things that I kind of try and use.
Thanks, Shalina. I think that's helpful for all of us. unfortunately we're out of time. I think we could carry on chatting for quite a while. I thank you for sharing your story. There's so much that I've taken away from it, but there are two things I'll definitely remember. I love your concept of victim, survivor, thriver, and how you go through that journey, and also being someone's Todd Woodbridge. But I think many of us will be someone's Yelena Dokic as well. So thank you so much for everything today. And I hope everybody online, thank you for joining us. And I hope you've got as much out of this as I have as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. I know I can't kind of see you, but I hope, I hope you got something positive out of it, that it was worth tuning in. I hope to, maybe get to meet you all one day. That would be amazing. And I hope to, do something with you again and see you again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.